The lawyer cleared his throat twice before he opened the final envelope, which told me, even before he said a word, that what was inside it was not routine. We had been sitting in that conference room for 40 minutes already. My mother, my brother, me and my aunt, who had come as emotional support for my mother, and had spent most of the meeting quietly confirming everything, my mother said with small synchronized nods. The will had been read. The assets had been distributed. My brother had received the house, the investment accounts, the business my father had spent 30 years building, and a sum of money that would take a careful person through the rest of their life without difficulty. I had received a single item, my father's watch, the one he wore every day, the one I had watched on his wrist my entire childhood, and the room had carried the particular, loaded silence of people deciding whether to acknowledge that something profoundly unequal had just been confirmed in official language. Then the lawyer said, "There is one remaining item, a sealed letter written by your father 8 months before his death, addressed to be read aloud to the entire family following the distribution." He picked up the envelope and looked at all of us and said, he was very specific that it be read after, not before. And my brother, who had spent the last 40 minutes settling into the posture of a man who has just been handed everything, shifted in his chair in a way that told me the word after had just done something to his certainty that the previous 40 minutes had built. Stay with me, because what my father wrote in that letter, and why he insisted it be read last, is the most important thing that happened in that conference room. And it was not about the money. If you've ever been the child a parent seemed to overlook, subscribe right now, because this story is about to show you that some people do their most important work in silence, and only reveal it at the very end. I need to take you back before the conference room, because the distribution you just heard wasn't a surprise to me on the day. It was the confirmation of something I had been watching accumulate for most of my adult life, brick by quiet brick, in the way families build their imbalances, without ever holding a meeting to officially decide on them. My brother's name is Callum. He is 4 years older than me, and from as early as I can accurately remember, he occupied the center of our family's attention, with the ease of someone who had never been required to earn it. Not because he was exceptional. Callum was perfectly ordinary in most respects, but because he was the firstborn, son of a man who had been raised to understand firstborn sons as the natural recipients of everything a father had built. My father was not a cold man. I want to be clear about that, because this story is complicated by the fact that I loved him, genuinely and fully, even through the years when the imbalance between my brother and me was impossible to miss. He coached my youth soccer team. He showed up to my school performances. He told me he was proud of me on enough occasions that I believed him. But there was a version of his love he reserved, specifically for Callum, a particular quality of attention, of investment, of treating Callum's decisions as matters of serious weight while treating mine as things to be gently managed rather than genuinely engaged with. He brought Callum into the business at 22. He mentored him personally for 8 years. He introduced him at industry events as his successor, with a pride that was real and warm and that I watched from the edges of rooms, holding my own quiet accomplishments, telling myself the difference didn't mean what it felt like it meant. I built my own career entirely independently, in a field my father found respectable but never fully understood, urban planning, the work of thinking about how cities grow and what they need to become, livable for the people inside them. I was good at it, genuinely good, in the way you know you're good at something when the evidence lives in the work rather than in the approval of an audience. I had won a regional award at 30. I had been part of a team whose project had restructured the development plan of an entire district in our city in ways that would matter for decades. I told my father about these things. He said he was proud. He said it with the same warmth. He said everything, and I believed it, and also understood that proud and invested were not the same thing in his particular emotional vocabulary, and that I received the first, and Callum received both. When my father got sick, I drove 3 hours every other weekend to help manage his care, coordinate with his doctors, and sit with him in the specific, quiet way that end-of-life care requires from the people who love you most. Callum came when he could, which was less often than I did, because the business demanded his attention in ways that my father himself endorsed. I heard him tell my mother on the phone once that Callum couldn't be expected to drop everything, that keeping the business stable was the most important thing Callum could do for the family right now. I drove 3 hours in the other direction and said nothing about this, because saying something would have required me to make a case for the value of my own presence. And I had stopped making that case years earlier when it became clear the verdict was already in. My father died on a Wednesday in November, and I was there and Callum was not, which is not an accusation. It is just the fact of how it happened, and the fact that I held my father's hand at the end of his life is something I carry not with bitterness but with the complicated weight of a person who loved someone imperfectly, loved back and showed up anyway, because showing up was what I had to give, and I gave it regardless of what it was going to cost me in the distribution. Comment? I showed up below if you've ever been the one who sat in the hospital chair, who drove the 3 hours, who handled the coordination, who was present for the parts that didn't have an audience, because you already know exactly what I mean. And this story is as much yours as it is mine. The reading of the will was held 3 weeks after the funeral, in the office of a lawyer named Mr. Hartley, a precise and composed man who had handled my father's affairs for over 15 years. Callum arrived first and sat with the expansive ease of someone who had been told enough to arrive without anxiety. My mother sat beside him. I sat across from them, and my aunt took the chair beside me, and we arranged ourselves in the geometry of a family that had already sorted itself by expectation before anyone opened a folder. Mr. Hartley read the will, the house to Callum, the investment portfolio to Callum, the business, the entirety of it, every stake, every asset, every 30 years of my father's professional life, to Callum. A monetary bequest to my mother, the watch to me, the one my father wore every day, silver, with a crack in the face he had never had repaired because he said it gave it character. I received it, and I held it in my hands while Mr. Hartley continued speaking, and I thought about my father's wrist, and the crack in the face, and the 3-hour drives, and I breathed evenly and did not give the room the reaction it was possibly waiting for. My aunt touched my arm. I did not look at her because looking at her would have cost me the composure I was choosing to maintain. Callum said nothing. My mother looked at the table with the expression of a woman who had known this was coming and had not found a way to feel entirely clean about it. Then Mr. Hartley picked up the second envelope and cleared his throat twice and told us about the letter. He read it in the measured tone of a man who had read it privately before this meeting and had prepared himself accordingly. My father's voice came through it with an accuracy that hit me before the content did. His particular rhythm, his habit of building to what he meant rather than starting with it, the way he always signaled that what was coming mattered by taking his time getting there. The letter began by acknowledging the distribution. Plainly, he had given the business and the financial assets to Callum, and he stated his reasons without apology. He had built the business for 30 years alongside Callum had been trained for it specifically, and transferring it to Callum was the decision that made the most professional sense for the company and the employees whose livelihoods depended on its stability. He was not asking for agreement, he wrote. He was offering the reasoning because he owed it to all of us to be honest about his thinking rather than simply deliver a verdict. Then the letter turned, and this is where the room changed. He wrote, "What I gave Callum was what I built. What I want to tell your sister is what she built, because I have been watching it for years without saying enough of this out loud, and I am not willing to leave without correcting that." He then listed, in specific and careful detail, every significant thing I had accomplished in the previous decade. The award named precisely. The district project described with an accuracy that told me he had researched it independently, that he had read about it beyond what I had told him and understood it beyond what I had explained. 3 other projects I had never even mentioned to him because I had stopped expecting him to be the audience for them. Described in his letter with the specificity of a man who had been paying close, private, deliberate attention from a distance I had mistakenly read as disinterest. He wrote, "I made a mistake. Over many years of underestimating how much she needed to hear from me that I saw her. I confuse pride with expression of pride, and those two things are not the same. I was proud. I did not say it often enough. specifically enough or with the weight it deserved, and I am saying it now because I would rather say it late than not at all. The room was completely still. I was not breathing normally. My aunt's hand was on my arm and I was not registered at the way you stop registering things when your entire available attention is being used for something else. My father's letter continued. He said he had made a separate arrangement outside the will, established 14 months before his death, which Mr. Hartley would now explain. He said the arrangement was not a correction of the will's distribution. Callum receiving the business was the right decision for the business, and he stood by it. The arrangement was something different. It was, he wrote, an attempt to say in financial language what he should have said more often in plain language, that he had 2 children, both of whom he loved, only one of whom he had consistently shown that love to in the specific way it needed to be shown, and that the debt created by that imbalance was not something money could fully address, but was something he was not willing to leave entirely unaddressed. Mr. Hartley opened a 3rd folder and explained the arrangement. A trust, established 14 months prior, funded over the following year from my father's personal savings, separate from the business accounts, $240,000 placed in my name, with a letter of instruction that specified it was to be used however I chose, with one sentence attached that was not a condition, but a wish, that some portion of it go toward work that mattered to me, because my father had read enough about what I did to understand that the work I had chosen was the kind that outlasted the person who did it, and he wanted to be part of something that lasted. Callum looked at the table. My mother pressed her fingers to her mouth. My aunt made a sound she converted immediately into a cough. I sat with the watch in my hands and the letter still being held by Mr. Hartley, and the specific, disorienting sensation of receiving something you needed so badly for so long that by the time it arrives, you have genuinely forgotten how to simply accept it without the part of you that protected you from not having it getting in the way. I want to be honest about what the money meant and what it didn't mean, because I think honesty here is more useful than a clean narrative. $240,000 did not balance 30 years of unequal investment. It did not give me back the 8 years Callum spent being mentored by someone who was mentoring me in none of the same ways. It did not undo the Sunday dinners where Callum's decisions were treated as serious and mine were gently redirected. The money was not justice. It was an acknowledgement. And acknowledgement and justice are different. And my father knew that too, because he said it in the letter. Plainly, this is not a correction. It is a statement of what I should have said more often with words. What the letter gave me, that the money did not and could not, was something I had not known I was still waiting for until I sat in that room and heard my father describe my work with the accuracy of a man who had been paying close attention in private for years. The specific grief of a child who is loved but not fully seen is the grief of not knowing whether the love that's there includes the parts of you that matter most. My father's letter told me, 14 months after he wrote it and 2 months after he died, that he had seen the parts that mattered most, that he had been watching, that the distance I had read as indifference had been something more complicated and less forgivable, and also more human than that. A man who felt pride without knowing how to make the pride legible, and who spent the last year of his life trying to build a correction out of the materials he had left. Callum called me that evening. He said, "I didn't know about the trust." I said I believed him. He said, "I didn't know he was watching you like that either." The things he said in that letter, a pause. I think Dad had more rooms in him than either of us got to see all of. It was the truest thing Callum had said to me in years, possibly ever, and I held it the way you hold something that arrives late but intact, carefully, without pressing it too hard, because some true things are fragile in their newness and need to be handled accordingly. My mother called the following morning and said, "Your father wrote that letter alone. He didn't tell me what was in it. I think he needed to say it to you without anyone else arranging it for him." I sat with that for a long time afterward, the image of my father, in the last year of his life, sitting down alone to write the thing. He had not found the words for across decades of proximity, choosing to say it, in a letter that would be read in a room he would not be in, to a daughter who would not be able to respond to him directly, because that was the only arrangement in which he had finally found a way To say it completely, I wear the watch every day now. The crack in the face catches the light at certain angles and does exactly what my father always said it did. Gives it character, makes it specific, makes it the watch that belonged to one person and now belongs to another and carries the whole story of that transfer in a line across its face. I think about him when I wear it. Not the father who gave Callum everything first, but the father who sat alone and wrote a letter that took 30 years to arrive and arrived. When it finally did, with the full weight of everything it had accumulated on the way, the trust funded 2 things. Half of it went into an investment I have been building for 3 years that is another story for another time. The other half went toward a community planning initiative I had been trying to find funding for since before my father got sick. A project designing accessible green infrastructure for 3 underserved neighborhoods in our city, the kind of work that will still be visible and useful long after the people who made it are gone. My father's wish in his own language, something that lasts. I put his name in the project acknowledgements. Not prominently, not as a headline, just in the list of people whose support made it possible, because that is where he belongs, not at the center of something he arrived at late, but present in it finally, in the way he always should have been. If this story moved something real in you, if you've ever been the child who was loved but not fully seen, or held someone's hand at the end of their life and wondered if they knew what that cost you, tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest. The distribution, the letter, or the watch with the crack in its face. I read every single one. Subscribe now for more raw, real stories about the families who get it wrong and the moments they try to get it right. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next story. And stay close, because what I'm bringing you next is even more powerful than this, and you do not want to miss a word.